Welcome, everyone, to the newest edition, the newest episode of the Absolute Truth, Absolutely podcast. For those of you that are watching this edition via the video stream, these are not our normal studios. You'll notice that we are filming this where we congregate, or we normally congregate every single Sunday, but there's a special set of circumstances that bring us to this place in particular. Nonetheless, as it used to be said in Barnum and Bailey, circuses and things of that nature, the show must go on.
That's it, and it is going on.
Therefore, we are fulfilling our responsibilities towards our listeners. In
one clarification, though, we are not showmen.
That is true. That is true. Although the amount of knowledge that we distribute is an exhibition in and of itself.
It is on display. Absolutely.
Now, some will question whether or not it is an entertaining exhibition or not. We'll leave that to the listeners and the viewers to decide.
We'll get entertaining on the second position. If it's educating,
yes,
uplifting, if it's edifying, we'll take that in the first position.
Absolutely. We'll take them both in conjunction, as a matter of fact, just to be able to say that we did both. So
we can edify, inform, educate as we entertain.
That is correct.
Great.
That is correct. Well, in this edition...
A lot better than Hollywood.
Absolutely. In this edition, we are going to deal with something that we don't necessarily consider to be entertaining. I think the display was rather pathetic.
Jordan Peterson? No? Oh, no. I jumped the gun. I'm sorry.
In this edition, we're going to talk about how Miss Cathy became a shoe shiner of sorts.
That's right. I just need some repenting, and I found me a place to do some repenting.
I have a question to ask you. Is it true or not that he had planned this in advance, evidenced by the fact that when he brought out the brush, it was a very new-looking, very stylish-looking brush. It's obvious that this was planned. It was staged.
Hey, he said he bought about 1,500 and gave these to some of his... I was going to say slaves, but that's not the way it works. It's talking about people that head up some of his stores, right?
Right.
Because you can't say slaves.
Right.
Now it'll be the N word, the S word, and pretty soon we won't have an alphabet.
You might not even be able to.
We just hum our way through life.
Well, I was going to say that maybe even grunting might be a form of racism in the future.
Yeah, because some people believe that type of work, especially for the low-end spectrum of those jobs, it's almost indentured.
No $15 an hour then?
Not for them.
For those of you that might have been living under a rock for the past few days are asking, Cathy, indentured servitude in a fast food restaurant, what are you guys alluding to? A few days ago, Louis Giglio, the Christian rapper Lecrae, and the CEO of Chik-Fil-A, Dan Cathy.
Also known as the virtue signaling chief in command of those things. You know, he signals his virtues.
Yes.
And he prepares them so way ahead of time that you can't look at that and say, boy, that was natural. That was improvisation all the way. No. It was rehearsed, probably in front of a mirror.
He tried to give the impression that it was spontaneous, and the fact of the matter is that it looked anything but.
True.
Some people have described it as cringeworthy. I agree, but I'll take it a step further. It was pathetic, and I think we'll be able to prove that in this edition of the Absolute Truth, Absolutely podcast. Well, what happened in particular a few days ago? Over at Passion Church, that is the organization that Louis Giglio heads, on stage were three persons, again, and the three persons were not the Trinity. They were nowhere near this place. We're speaking here about Louis Giglio, Lecrae, and Dan Cathy, the CEO of Chik-Fil-A. And obviously, Louis Giglio was advancing the concepts of Black Lives Matter, the unjustified and sinful doctrine of systemic racism, critical race theory, etc., all of these things that are under the guise of cultural Marxism. And of course, Lecrae was the token black man upon which he was supposed to be the representative of every other black man whom white men have to pander to in order to prove that they're not truly racist, all under the guise of Christianity, you see.
And this young man is a model citizen. He has been all of his life.
Are we talking about Lecrae?
Yes.
We're speaking about the man whom raps about black culture's glorification of violence, promiscuous sex.
That's the one.
But then he turns around and he blames all of the ills of black culture on white America.
Yes, that's the one.
What is it that you said before about the secularist argumentation? They flip the coin, and before it lands,
or even after it lands, if it's heads,
right,
they win. If it's tails, you lose. It's a win-win or a lose-lose.
What a dichotomy, right?
Yes.
This man has said in the past, I've documented this before, that his hero growing up was Tupac Shakur.
Well, there you go.
That model of morality.
There you go.
And that he was given to sleeping around with women and whatnot. And we asked Lecrae, before we continue on with the rest of the discussion, white America made you do that?
Well, that's one question. And then the other question or questions that we have for him is, did you make reparations on all those cases?
Good question.
Because, we do have a double standard at work, at play right now. And it has to do with, heads you win, tails I lose. For example, white America is told, since your mama and your dad had slaves, you got to pay reparations, right?
Right.
You got to pay reparations. Because your mom and your dad, they own slaves. So white kids, doesn't matter if it was 3-4 generations ago, they have to pay. And so you think, oh, okay, that's the model. The parents did it, the kids pay for it. DACA comes along, and what's the argument? You can't blame the kids for what mama and dada have done. And once again, heads they win and tails I lose. Where's the consistency?
None.
And then this is in a Christian setting, in a Christian format. And we know that all unrighteousness is sin. So we just saw a lot of sinning. That was a lot of sinning under the guise of humility.
It's true. Completely agreed. I think that these race hustlers, these race baiters, however you want to denominate them, they commit two atrocities at the same time. I'm going to describe it in the following manner. In a secular level, and furthermore at the Christian level. What do I mean by this? When you are using terms of generalities, meaning white America, you are encompassing, you are including in that group every single person whose ethnicity is Caucasian, white, Anglo-Saxon, however the listener or viewer may want to describe it. At the secular level, we're not even focused in here at the Christian level yet.
Okay.
You're making a huge error because you're vilifying a ton of people that bear no responsibility for oppressing others of a different ethnicity. That is an injustice which, as you've mentioned, John says is a sin.
Nevertheless, they have that part of their doctrine, talking about liberals. If the parents did it, the kids have to pay. Always keep that in mind, because then when you least expect it, they flip it on you.
Right, exactly. To further focus the microscope, specifically in something that we're involved in, as it were, we're believers, we're brethren in Christ. You're a pastor. I've ministered alongside you now for years. We've been ministering to a church for years now. We're speaking now at a congregational level, at a Christian level. Why are these people whom profess Christ now taking an ideology which is inherently secular, inherently anti-biblical, and now they're trying to Christianize it, as they've done with many other things throughout the past decades, where the church has made itself more and more secular, trying to appease the wrath of sinners. Now they're taking this secularist idea, they're introducing it into the church. Here's the second sin. Now they're saying that white Christians are responsible. Lecrae advances this idea implicitly and explicitly, that white Christians are also to blame for the ills of black culture.
I guess we're guilty because he said so. Where's the proof?
It's yet to be given. It's all implied. It's all implied. But then here's what happens. Dan Cathy, in this pathetic display, we're not even going to show it during this episode, it's already been widely promulgated. I'm pretty sure most of our audience has seen that wretched display. Dan Cathy and Louis Giglio don't help the cause of truth when they play into these false notions and false representations and injustice, these the blame game that they're playing with people that have done no wrong, when they say, Cathy specifically said it, we Caucasians, we ought to bear shame. We ought to be repentant over what we've done and feel the pain of our black brethren. Why aren't you, instead of fighting the vilification, why are you joining this falsehood? Why are you allowing yourself to be categorized as something that you're not?
Not only that, you take something that people have done for the longest time, maybe a couple of centuries now, shoe shining, and you turn it into something that is the representation of oppression and evil. And in some countries, shoe shiners even have unions, associations. And so if he thinks that is evil, because this is what supposedly blacks had to do, the only thing they could do, which is not true. But nevertheless, let's just follow that line of thinking. Then why would you say now whites need to do this? Just so they can understand the pain someone went through. Okay, then anytime I need to understand somebody, I have to go and do, just in a symbolic way for about 2 minutes, whatever it was that it was imposed on them, and that way I have a real good notion now of what they went through.
But isn't that pandering?
Of course. Do you think this guy, in front of, I don't know how many thousands were watching that,
plus whoever's seen it online,
exactly, actually felt humbled by that? That there was a great lesson of humility? It was a showcase. That's all it was.
Exactly. And then he's lecturing other people whom share his skin tone on their supposed sins and their lack of shame and whatnot, and they ought to feel it, when it's obvious that this was rehearsed. It's obvious that this was pre-planned, as it were, to give an impression of humility when in fact it was false humility. I think it became more evident when Lecrae joked. He said, I'll also take some shares from Chik-Fil-A.
Just a shoe shining.
He did.
That's all you're going to get.
He didn't laugh. And Cathy did not laugh at that, which again, I think that in and of itself, I don't know if it was witty or not.
We do so much for charity throughout the years, so please don't bring it up. We give away so much money.
Oh, including giving to LGBT organizations,
yes,
just
we
like
do
it was
that
discovered?
Too. That's right. We do that too. And if we have to cut some people from our giving because they criticize our giving, then we cut them. We don't mind.
What was that? The Salvation Army and also the Fellowship of Christian Athletes?
Yeah, because it's all a virtue within a virtue. And after you get a virtue and you put it within a virtue, what you have is nothing. Because it's absorbed by the previous virtue. And so
y'all get that?
Absolutely. It's just a lot of virtue that I've been signaling, and people just don't get my virtues.
I am the virtue signaler.
That's right. I'm Mr. Virtue. Look it up.
As a matter of fact, I want you all to know that this brush that I use to clean Mr. Lecrae's shoes is going on sale for $19.99 pretty soon.
That's right. You can get it with your waffle fries. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
What was it that he said that he had distributed this to thousands? If I'm not mistaken, there you go.
Mistaken was the number he used. I could be wrong. I'll stand corrected.
So I'm pretty sure when some people received that in the mail, the managers and whatnot, they saw
this is for my horse.
Huh? Can I use this on my dog?
Here, Mr. Ed. Somebody just donated. Oh wait, it's a Chick-Fil-A brush. Wilbur.
Can you imagine? They opened that letter to the managers of the stores, of the restaurants. What? I'm supposed to shine somebody's shoes? I thought it was here to operate a restaurant.
And was that a suggestion or a commandment?
That's a good question.
Was it a commandment? Because maybe he told them, you best get yourself down to doing some shoe shining.
Now, it's curious that we mention this, because obviously Cathy is trying to allude to Christ washing the disciples' feet as a sign of humility, as it were.
So then the blacks, even though it was imposed on them, according to Cathy, were doing the right thing, except it was imposed on them. He loses no matter how he chooses to present this. I'm going to get on this man's case no matter how he chooses to present this, because he's got no way out. He boxed himself in.
Exactly. And your understanding of Scripture, when we approach that particular portion of Scripture where we see Jesus washing the feet of the apostles, of the disciples, what is the main message that we are to extract? And then, of course, we'll segue that into how Cathy tried to use that, but of course using shoe shining in this particular to try to so-called identify with black Americans. It's obvious that he was trying to allude to that, even though he didn't speak it. He's trying to allude to that because it's the Christian thing to do, to wash the saints' feet.
Well, there's Christian service in there. Of course there is. Of course, we can also look back at the historic context of that situation, and when people came in from their walk, buying their groceries, whatever it is they were doing, the servants, when the guest arrived or the master arrived, they cleaned their feet. So we understand all of that.
They were cleaning their Nike sandals back in the Roman Empire?
Absolutely. Roman Nike sandals.
The Kobe Bryant sandals.
That's right. And they were, at that time, manufactured in Egypt.
In Egypt, that's right.
Right
with
next,
a lot of slave
right
labor.
Next door to the Chik-Fil-A's they had
right.
in Egypt. And they had kosher and non-kosher food. But anyway, we understand the historical context of this. And there is service, Christian service, godly service. We get it. But when you make a show out of this, how did Jesus do it? Did he go, I think I know what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to take a Passover situation and not in private with my disciples. I'm going to make sure I do this publicly where everybody can see me and they'll see how humble I am. And then once they see that, they will love me, and maybe we'll sew little crosses with a little towel around it, and it'll be great. All people will learn humility. He did this in private.
Yes.
And so it was to teach us a lesson in humility, but not also in humility, because true humility, Gio, is something that is with you at all times. You practice this at all times. Either you are or you are not. And you do learn it. I understand you learn it. Jesus said to learn from him. I get it. But once you take it to this place of exhibition, it's anything but.
Exactly.
And this is why I continue to say he boxed himself in, and I will continue to point out whatever excuse he gives us to explain away why he did it this way, I will continue to pound him with it.
Meaning that these whites that are gathering together for these great exhibitions, that's why we were joking at the beginning of the podcast that this is a bit exhibitionist. We were pointing to this portion of what we're talking about. Now, the reason that they're doing this much exhibitionism with their pandering to blacks and feeling their pain and supposedly repenting and making amends for what their ancestors did in the past is nothing more than sanctimony. It's nothing more than to showcase, as it were, the supposed virtue that these men have in their lives. If you're truly not a person who believes in ethnic superiority, nowadays it's called racism. We've talked about that before. There is no such thing as different races within humanity. The Bible very clearly states that we are all descendant from a singular bloodline. So if you want to use the term race, we rue the day that became popular because it points to Darwin's conceptions of the origins of humanity and whatnot. Let's call it what the Bible calls it, humankind, etc., mankind. When you point to that, if anyone in particular subscribes to the idea, if you don't subscribe to the idea of ethnic superiority, why then must you make a showcase of the fact that you don't believe in such a thing? If you are already a person whom does not distinguish persons according to their ethnicity, their background, their skin tone, why must you make an exhibition of it unless you're trying to score points with someone or something in particular?
Let's quote him. So any expressions of a contrite heart, of a sense of humility, there it is, right? A sense of shame, a sense of embarrassment, begat with an apologetic heart. I think that's what our world needs to hear today. Look, if you feel you've wronged a black man, a black woman, a black person, if you feel that in your heart you hate colored people, by all means, apologize. Do things right. Correct your life. Make things right. But if this is true, it'll be seen on your daily walk. You don't need to go in front of a live audience or something that is taped that will be seen by thousands upon thousands of people to say, look at the virtue that I have developed. The important thing, if you are making that correction in your life, is that God sees it. Because now we take this situation from Cathy, and it's at the very least, misconstrued by many. The rapper said he didn't feel comfortable in that setting.
Right, especially after Louis Giglio ended up saying that slavery in some way, shape, or form became sort of a white blessing, as it were. The comments were misconstrued. The things weren't expressed properly. Furthermore, when you hear Giglio and when you hear Cathy express certain ideas, we find that there is no historical basis for many of the things that they are advancing because they're advancing the false narratives of Black Lives Matter. Of course, Lecrae is there bobbing his head like a bobblehead because he's in agreement. If he wasn't comfortable with what was said, why was he bobbing his head so much and so much in agreement with what Giglio and Cathy were saying? I've documented this before. Lecrae tries to play both sides, and I've said this before. People can call me a racist. A lot of these black entertainers, celebrities, they know that the vast majority of the public that purchases their music, their so-called art and whatnot, are white folk. So they know that in a sense they have to pander, as it were, to that whiteness, but then they also don't want to lose their street cred, as it were, with the blacks. So you see the duplicity on behalf or from people like Lecrae and others whom they say, I want to enjoy the benefits that white culture has, specifically the wealth. But at the same time, I also don't want to lose my street cred with my black brethren.
Let me give you the flip side of this. When I was in 8th grade, or 9th grade, 8th to 9th, I was told you can no longer go to the junior high school next to your house. It was like maybe a 4-block walk for me. You're going to be shipped way across town, and you will be studying your 9th grade lessons and materials in Booker T, Washington, a black school. Okay? The first few months, we were bused there. And they said, we have no money. The county has no money, so you still have to get yourself there. So all of us walked to Booker T. It was now I'm going to say at least a 2-mile trek. When the school bell rang and we were let out and we had to walk home, we went through a black neighborhood to walk into a Latino neighborhood. The things that I heard coming from black adults just lampooning us, criticisms, provoking us, begs me to now today ask, am I going to get reparations from those blacks? Or were they just exhibiting their anger? Because maybe the tone of my skin is somewhat European. My dad has his roots in Spain. So that wasn't racist. That was just anger. That had nothing to do with what we are facing today because only whites can be racist.
And in those instances, as you've recalled to me before, they specifically mentioned your ethnicity.
Oh, we got a load full. I mean, it was horrific. And, our parents at the end of the day became scared. And so they had to dig into their pockets and get us some busing, private busing, to get us to school and back. So I've seen both sides. And today it seems like only whites are racist. And whites have to make reparation. This is why, again, I mentioned what I opened with. This is the liberal argument as it pertains to reparations and making things right for blacks. If you're a white person, if it can be proved that your parents, your ancestors, had slaves, you have to pay. You have to pay. You have to pay up. Reparations are due. Okay. If you're a DACA recipient, if you're a dreamer, everything is forgiven because what your parents did can't really be placed on.
It's a double standard.
And so now I bring another double standard. Whites are racist because, they've done all kinds of things to blacks. This is a Latino man talking to you, by the way, a Hispanic. When I went and took my test for the American citizenship, I answered as best as I knew how. Race, I said white. And an Oriental man, he said, you're not white. I said, what am I? He said, you're Hispanic. I said, that's fine with me. I just want to be American. I don't want to be a Latino American. I want to be an American. Because this has brought so much division into our country. I just want to be an American.
Theodore Roosevelt, blows my mind that he was a progressive. He himself, a lot of progressives, if they were to hear many of Theodore Roosevelt's ideas on the issue of immigration and naturalization and other things, they would say he's not a progressive. He himself, there's a quote, I don't have the exact quote in mind, I'll paraphrase it. He said, "You can't have dual allegiances. If you're a person with dual allegiances, you're not American. Hyphenation will bring the country to ruination." He foresaw what was going to happen with this splintering, this balkanization according to ethnic lines.
I heard honky more than I care to recall. Cracker. I heard it all. So at this stage, I'm 63 years old. I'm going on 64. I don't care who's talking to me. If they try to convince me that racism has only played out on one side of the ledger, I've got stories for them.
Giglio himself, when they were speaking in this panel, he himself advanced the idea that what you've just said is the truth, meaning that only whites have demonstrated racism, as it were, and oppression towards blacks in the country. We have history, true history, that contradicts the false narrative. There were plenty of black slave owners in the South and in the North as well. And this whole generalization, which basically teaches that all blacks in America were enslaved at one point or another, and there was no such thing as free blacks, is a lie. Likewise, there was a bunch of indentured white slaves, more indentured white slaves than there were black slaves in the United States. So, to your point, if we're going to ask these rhetorical questions to see how these politics and these policies play out, what happens then with respect to the ancestors of black slave owners? Do they get to pay reparations to the whites that, the descendants of whites that they had enslaved in the past? And what about black slave owners that owned other blacks? Do they get to pay reparations to them?
I was mistreated. I want Will Smith to send some money my way. Maybe Kobe Bean Bryant left a little something for me. Perhaps LeBron. I don't know. I can't go back and find those families that said all those nasty things to me. You're making that stuff up. You're just a racist. Okay, let me clarify it a little further. I married into a black family. My father-in-law is a black man. My daughter married a black man. Yeah, you're still a racist, though. You just did that out of, I don't know, you just did it. Right, I'm a racist. You see, people can sit there in judgment of me, in judgment of you, and when they hear our explanations, automatically they go, these are just two racist people. And on top of that, they call themselves Christians. And then you mention something that, like I just mentioned, and they go, oh. So we're not speaking out of skin tone.
Right.
We are talking out of experience.
Right.
So you can call me whatever you want to call me. I'm comfortable in my skin. My son is comfortable in his skin.
Yes. We don't have to go around proving that we're not racists, as it were.
The only reason I brought it up is because some people will miss the greater point, the most important point, because they stop at this guy is probably a racist. Right.
If we're going to bring this back to the scriptures, we were mentioning Christ and washing of the feet and all these things. You were mentioning earlier about a person, if they have any particular antagonism towards those of the opposite skin tone or a darker skin tone or a lighter skin tone, what have you. As we've proven, there isn't racism, if we're going to use that terminology, isn't exclusive to whites. There's a bunch of blacks also that believe in black ethnic superiority and whatnot. This is a point that actor Terry Crews tried to make, and they almost crucified him for it. You're not black. I mean, you look at Terry.
So now he's Terry Crews-ified.
Exactly. But when you think about it, there's no need, as it were, to make an exhibitionism of the fact that you're not a person who believes in ethnic superiority. But if we bring this over to, again, Christianity, the model to follow is if you have that sort of antagonism against an ethnic group or whatnot, and you need to be, forgiven of that, you ask the Lord for forgiveness for that. You repent of it. And if you've done wrong to someone, Jesus prescribes that you ought to go to that brother, ask for forgiveness, and then mend the things. But not this wholesale, what shall we call it, ideology where suddenly one whole ethnic group is at fault for the supposed oppression and repression and other ills that plague another group, which that other ethnic group brings upon itself. We've said it beforehand. How many times have we explained that Black Lives Matter and other similar ideologies are nothing more than a close cover to try to disguise the fact that the problems emanate from Black America itself? Violence, fatherlessness, the exaltation of sin, fornication, drug taking, etc. These are things that are deeply entrenched in Black America, in their music, in their culture.
Same with Latinos. Instead of coming over to this country and becoming Americans, we brought our culture into this country. And now you have pockets in some states, in some communities, that you go, this is just like the way it used to be back in Nicaragua, in Colombia, in Cuba. The problem is, yes, in the family, but also in the educational system, we have to continue, or we have to go back and teach American principles. Make sure that the kids that are learning whatever it is they're supposed to learn in their formative years is true and something that will develop them into tremendous human beings and citizens. Yep. This is not what's happening today.
Question to ask you, because this ties in. I'm looking here at my Bible app on my phone to try to prove this.
I thought that was Lecrae.
Calling you. He's canceling me. He's canceling me. Remember,
you've been canceling your dad too.
Cancel culture. Question to ask you. When the Apostle Paul writes that Cretans are lazy, gluttonous beasts, and he proceeds to say, this testimony is true, was that racist on his behalf? Was he demonstrating his racism against Cretan people?
Yes, indeed. And he'll have to make reparations in heaven. And the way he'll do that, Gio, is he'll take some of that reward that Jesus has laid up for him, and he'll have to distribute it. Because he created such pain and such division that he will have to pay for that.
Titus chapter number 1. Every time I read that text,
reparations in heaven. Yes,
it makes me.
The title of my latest book, Reparations in Heaven.
He's writing to Titus about the Cretans. He had left Titus in Crete. Verse 12. One of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, "Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons." This testimony is true.
Yep.
So suddenly, here is Paul pointing out a problem within a particular culture. I have yet to hear a single Christian say Paul was a racist. No, Paul was pointing out something that, I hate to use the term distinguished, but it was an overarching characteristic that characterized the Cretans that needed to be corrected. So when we point out the deficiencies, as it were, within Black culture, they themselves call it Black culture, it's our culture, and we see that biblically, these things run contrary to what Christian morality teaches. And we say, stop blaming whites for the ills that you yourself are exalting in that, through your music, through your so-called culture, the movies that exalt all of that, and through the various artists and celebrities that come out of that, and they use that, they sell, as it were, their so-called art, and they allude to that. What fault is that of whites, of Hispanics, or others, if that's the sort of thing that you glorify? That's a problem that you have to deal with internally and not blame others for you yourself committing.
Paul said he had no evil or bad conscience about any of the things that he did, including before he came to Christ, because he went through the blood of Christ, right? But this is an issue that has come up in different ways, and I'm going to get in trouble with the Jews now. The Anti-Defamation League will probably call me and ask me to repent, because they'll call me an anti-Semite.
And the SPLC will seek to cancel you also.
At one point or another, when Peter started to enjoy his gig with the Gentiles, he had Carolina honey. I'll take a full rack of those. And then one day he heard the James gang knocking on the door. And what did he say? Put away the Carolina honeys. I only do kosher stuff. Right?
I only eat Hebrew National.
Exactly. And what did Paul do?
He called them out on his hypocrisy.
There you go.
So we see
what would Paul say of Cathy?
I think he would denounce him. He would probably say, just like the Cretans. Just like the Cretans. But this is the sort of duplicity that we see, the sort of doctrine that is making its way inside of the churches. And I think we're going to point to another reason why this is happening. Cowardice from among not only Christians, lay Christians, but also from people whom call themselves, I hate the terminology, leaders, Christian leaders, capitulating to this movement. You were making a great point. We were talking about this in other outlets that we try to disseminate the truth in. Joel Osteen.
Oh, no. Now you're hitting a note.
Where was he when Anise Parker was her name? I forget her name. I think it's something like that.
Yep.
The former mayor of Houston,
yes,
a recalcitrant lesbian,
yes,
was demanding recorded sermons from Houston area pastors to see if they were becoming too political.
You couldn't
see
him.
Sermons.
I know what you're gonna. I know exactly what you're gonna ask. You couldn't see him because he was shining her shoes. Yeah, nowhere to be found. Right.
Tony Evans, isn't his church in the same area? If I'm not mistaken.
The urban alternative.
The urban alternative, right?
Not sure.
Where were they fighting for religious liberty? COVID-19 hits the United States in some measure or another. The lockdowns are instituted. Where was Joel Osteen marching on the streets, demanding that churches be reopened and not submitting to the dictates of men, as we see in the book of Acts with Peter and John? Yet Black Lives Matter begins to take the stage. And what does he do? He begins to march with the so-called protesters.
He was showing love to the Floyd family. Just out here marching and show them that we care, that we hurt with you, we love you.
The martyr. We're talking about the man whom held a pregnant woman at gunpoint, and threatened her life.
You know, Gio, I'm old enough now to be able to say this. Some people conduct themselves in such a beautiful way that even God will not stay quiet as to testifying on their behalf. And so there are wonderful people that have led tremendous lives. I really respect the way they've done things. And so their giving is in private. And their humility is not something that they boast about. And then God will tell on them. Somebody will come up and say, you know, they're accusing this brother or this person of this, that, or the other thing. But let me tell you something. I know this man. I know this person. And when I was going through this, this is what he did. And another person will get up and say, hey, not only did the person do this for her or for him, he did it for me also. And you don't have to testify. You don't have to go around saying, wow, look at the great virtues that I'm exhibiting.
You're not boasting about yourself. Other people will give testimony of your character.
God will take care of that. First of all, you're not doing it so people will think highly of you.
Exactly.
We don't want people to think highly of us. We want people to think highly of Christ.
Exactly.
And when you do exalt him, when you do honor him, the Bible says he will honor you right back. So you don't have to go around boasting of, look how much I love the black people. I'm marching here with them. The black people will come out and say, even when some are thinking of destroying you and burning your building, says, wait a minute. You can't pin evil on this guy because we know how he proceeds. And that's the way you do things. At least that's my understanding of
good point.
Biblical procedure.
That's a good point. One of the things that I also have to mention about Cathy's remarks is that he vilifies people that fought for civil rights in this country. An example, quote, we as Caucasians, until we're willing to just pick up the baton and fight for our black African-American brothers and sisters, which they are as one human race, we're shameful. We're just adding to it. Most of us, white people, we're out of sight, out of mind, oblivious to it. We cannot let this moment pass. Our silence is so huge at this time, we cannot be silent. Someone has to fight, and God has so blessed our city, but it's shameful how we let things get so out of whack.
The audacity of this guy thinking he speaks for many people.
And what about his vilification, for example, of whites that marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and other blacks in this country, demanding the just treatment of blacks, especially around the Jim Crow South?
I hear you. But I go back to my point, not to belittle yours. Who made him the spokesperson?
I agree.
I remember when evangelicals and Catholics, remember that? Great meeting of great minds?
Wasn't it Pat Robertson? He said, I stand here in representation of all Christians.
Benny Hinn and other evangelicals. They don't speak for me.
Exactly.
And so I'm listening to this and I'm asking myself, who chose these people? Who made them my leaders? They don't speak for me. And this guy seems to be speaking for a lot of people.
Exactly. So this is something, folks, that we have to continually comment on, because we feel the need to do so for various reasons. Number one, the truth isn't being disseminated.
If you don't denounce this, then you are letting him speak for you.
Exactly. We feel that the gospel is being vilified because these are Christians also speaking for Christians and for Christianity. And when the gospel is being vilified in the way that it's being vilified, of course, it's all hidden under this supposed mantle of forgiveness and racial reconciliation. So therefore, unless you explain things the way that we're doing so, the typical charge against persons like us is, you're against racial reconciliation, you're against unity. No, as we have explained, we're not against those things. As a matter of fact, the Bible did away with racial distinctions a long time ago.
But so I don't need reconciliation, so he doesn't speak for me. Like I said, I'm married into a black family. My daughter is married to a black man. There is no reconciliation going on in our family.
And that's the thing. If you're a Christian and you subscribe to the Christian ethic, those distinctions, as it were, don't exist. So there's no need, as it were, to demonstrate your credentials in a vainglorious manner, as this man and others have done.
And for those that would say, now you are virtue signaling. No, I'm going to state it again. I have mentioned these things because if I don't, some people will say he's a racist, and I'll stop listening. That's the only reason I mentioned it. Otherwise, I would not have brought it up. But we're making an important distinction, an important point here. Cathy doesn't speak for us. Let him speak for himself.
Exactly.
That's about all he can do. And if this is what he is doing, he's going about it the wrong way.
Exactly. And that in and of itself shows you the arrogance that he's trying to hide behind this false sense of humility.
Let me showcase it with another example, Jill. These companies are showing up at some public event or a press conference, and they say something to the effect of, we're going to give away $12 million to Black Lives Matter. And the people go, wow, that is wonderful. That's a great thing they're doing. You know who's paying for that?
We are, the public.
That's exactly right.
They're going to make that money back. They're not going to let that escape their coffers without bringing up their products a couple cents here, a couple cents there, so that they can make up for that money that they're giving altruistically, of course.
And how do you know that? This is the history of business.
Yes, especially corporations.
That's the way they do things. And so in an age, what was it that Andre Agassi said in that commercial? Image is everything.
Image is everything, yes.
This is probably what they are doing.
Look, the only thing I want out of all of this, actually, there's a couple things that I want from this. I want these people to stop speaking for Christianity and vilifying it. Because, again, we stated it beforehand, and I'll condense it for our audience once again. When you blame people that have no fault of having done something sinful, that in and of itself is a sin. When you're demanding that someone give you reparations, even though that person has done no wrong to you, that is an injustice. You're attributing sin where sin ought not to be attributed. You're imposing sin. That is also a sin. A third sin, when you have the company that produces Oreos saying that Black Lives Matter, and yet Oreos are dressed in blackface, that is also a problem.
Listen, folks, don't misconstrue what we are saying. We're not disavowing that some people need to make corrections in their lives. But if you're going to do this, do it honestly before God, and not just so that you can feel, now others are looking at me, and I'll enjoy a better testimony from other people, even though there's been no changes in your heart. If the change happens in your heart, it will be manifested. It'll bear fruit. And if not, it'll just be something fake. And I happen to think that it'll displease the Lord.
I agree.
But we'll see what happens. I think this is just barely getting started.
I agree. So I guess our exhortation for the audience during this edition is be careful with the sanctimonious types. Be careful with the virtue signalers, because they can lead you via emotionalism down a path where it's really not about forgiveness. It's really not about virtuous living. It's more about sanctimony. It's more about vainglory than it is anything else. And those things are sin.
And here's something prophetic, and I'm not a prophet, and I'm not prophesying, but nevertheless, it's somewhat prophetic. Prepare yourself. There's a big battle coming up. What's it about? You have the insight? I have the scoop, ladies and gentlemen. When we get ready to go back to school, that's going to be a big, big fight, and we'll be there to cover it for you. We will cover that because there's a big battle brewing, and it's just around the corner. Are kids going to go back to school? How many are going to be sitting in one classroom? And what are the teachers going to say?
And what about the black-white ratio and the racial tensions? That's all going to come to fruition at one point or another. That's why I think it's important now to note that there's a bunch of parents whom are foreseeing what could happen if they send their children back to school, and they're choosing to homeschool. And many people within government are seeing this, people that are vehemently opposed to educational freedom, and they're trying to do everything they can to impede parents from exerting their authority as parents over the education of their children. Can't give the particulars in this edition. We've run out of time, unfortunately. But in Virginia, they found out in Virginia, the state that Ralph Blackface Northam, right?
Ralph Northam.
They tried to impose extra legal requirements on parents whom decided to pull their children out of public schooling and to homeschool them completely. If I'm not mistaken, the Virginia Supreme Court ruled against the municipality and ruled in favor of homeschooling parents, saying you can't add these extra legal, as it were, requirements, because they saw it was evident that they were simply trying to impede the parents.
Even though Hillary said it takes a village? How dare the Supreme Court of the state side with the parents? It takes a village.
So that's going to be the next fight on the horizon, parents asserting their authority to educate their kids as they see fit, and the state saying, no, you don't.
If it takes a village, who is going to be the village idiot? Or will it be the village people leading the way?
Lecrae, Cathy, and Giglio are fighting for the top spot.
It takes a village, folks. Century Village, where STDs are rampant.
And an all of false racism as well.
Indeed.
That's all the time we have left for this edition. We ask you to visit the website, atapodcast.org, atapodcast.org. You can also listen to these podcasts if you're driving via the Google Play Store, Spotify, and iTunes. Please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and also a favorable rating on the other podcast platforms so that the algorithms pick it up, and then that can also help us out with the distribution. And also, we ask you to consider donating. Visit the website, once again, atapodcast.org. There are plenty of people, plenty of entities that are trying to silence the truth of the gospel, especially the oligarchs from Silicon Valley, and that's why we're asking people to visit the website directly. Sign up for our email updates. We're going to begin offering email subscriber exclusive content very soon. So subscribe. You'll be receiving that for free, and also consider making a donation at atapodcast.org. For Pastor Jesus Martinez, this has been Gio. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Until the next time that we meet, may the Lord shine his face upon you.